Well, hello everybody, Newbornkilik here, welcoming you back to another awesome Zelda Theory. Today I'm going to be taking a look at heart containers, how they may translate over into real life. Of course, there's going to be a lot of speculation, but there were some fun things that I found and some interesting things to note between the different Zelda games. And of course, at the end of the day, we're going to be interested in how many heart containers the average quote-unquote human being would have. So in most games, Link will start with 3 hearts. Now, I want to point out Ocarina of Time specifically. This 3 heart limit kind of seems to be, before he's awakened as a hero. However, he's not usually yet fully an adult. So, to kind of put it into perspective, Link has 3 hearts in Ocarina of Time. Most of the time, he starts around with 3 hearts, except for Skyward Sword, which is, of course, a little bit of a special case, but we'll get into the reasoning behind that in just a little bit. But yes, going back to Ocarina of Time, as we note, young Link really hasn't started to awaken as the hero at that time, so it would be kind of safe to assume that he would have the average amount of hearts for a child that age. Now, if we take a look at Skyward Sword, that Link is actually a little bit older and has kind of had time to mature and, become a bit tougher, granting him 6 hearts at the beginning of the game. Something else interesting to note here is while he does have 6 hearts, he is also training to become a knight. He's honing his skills at the Knight Academy under a real teacher, someone who's most likely fully trained as a knight themselves, and it would make more sense that, he would get more rigorous training at this point as opposed to the other Links in the timeline where they're just kind of average, just kind of guys just hanging out, except for Twilight Princess, who's kind of a ranch hand, but he's not really training to do anything specifically with combat, but of course you do have to be pretty rugged to be living on a farm and doing that kind of work, so I kind of see some flaws with that. He's not just learning from some random guy on an island who happens to not even use a sword. He actually uses a spear anyway, so what does he know? But not to discredit the old man. I'm not looking to disrespect, okay? No disrespect. Bear in mind, Breath of the Wild Link, of course, has been sleeping for 100 years, which probably takes your vitality down just a little bit. Usually whenever we find Link, he's starting off on a peaceful island, really no threat or anything is kind of going on, and then, of course, suddenly something goes wrong. Oof. Now, bear in mind, of course, this is not a perfect comparison, but it does kind of give us a sort of guideline to go off of. Something else kind of interesting to note is that Link probably didn't do a whole lot of training. He wasn't technically sleeping in the Chamber of Sages. They actually sealed him away for, those 7 years, which something kind of interesting about that as well is that if you just kind of go through the game and don't collect any of the side hearts, you just do the bare minimum mission to get to adulthood in Ocarina of Time, you actually end up with about 6 hearts as well. So it makes sense that, these 2 Links, the one from Ocarina of Time and the one from Skyward Sword, are about the same level of skill or vitality, and that kind of just goes to show that they both have gone through the ringer a little bit. They're trained up now. Kid Link is, he's been inside a fish. That'll put some hair on your chest, okay? That's gonna do something to you. And it's not good. But yeah, that's just kind of a fun fact. When you think about it, heart pieces can take quite a bit of physical exertion to actually get to. A lot of times they're hidden out of the way. You gotta move a boulder, literally lifting a boulder. In some cases, it's that crazy. Some other sort of physical test, it seems. You have to climb up a wall or something. So it's kind of like Link's physical representation of, his muscles growing larger and him essentially growing in physique as a Hylian. So now that we have a benchmark for a young adult who is, pretty trained up, he's seen some stuff, but not quite a grizzled war veteran just yet, and a small child. Now, how much would a Darknut have? Because as we do see, Darknuts are highly trained soldiers. As we see in some of the games, they even do follow a sort of I don't want to say medieval, but almost extinct in this day of age code of honor. Twilight Princess really seems to, embody that. Whenever you fight an Iron Knuckle, they're very respectful. They're not doing any cheap tricks. They're not trying to, throw sand in your eyes. They don't even have a ranged attack. The most ranged thing they do is literally throw their weapon at you, which is I mean, I don't think that's dishonest. If you get hit by it, it's your own fault. So yes, if we look at Darknuts, we can actually see that in the original Zelda, it takes 4 to 8 hits with the weakest sword. Depending on which color of Darknut you're running into, the blue one will take 8, whereas the red one will only take 4. Of course, red one's a bit weaker, but that is beside the point. My point here is, in this sort of little experiment that we've run here, we have to assume that our baseline of 1 damage is the weakest sword. So we can kind of assume that 1 point of damage is equivalent to 1/4 of a heart. Those are the two kind of minimums that we have on damage versus health in this instance. So if we take a look at that, we actually find out that the almighty blue Darknuts only have 2 hearts. That is exceedingly disappointing. So of course this seems very strange. How would a child, you start the original Zelda with more than 3 hearts, which essentially means you have more vitality as a, new adventurer than these hardened veterans of war. What is up with that? We're looking at the amount of damage that something does with a very vague baseline. We really need more things, more instances of damage in a Zelda game to kind of draw an accurate representation of. I mean, I spent a lot of time trying to piece this together and make sense of everything that I was looking at here and kind of get an overall idea of how much health a Darknut would have over, and I would even be happy with just an average of the Zelda games, but as it turns out, there are just so many variables in health. Don't even get me started on Breath of the Wild, okay? Don't even get me started on Breath of the Wild. Maybe we'll get to that game, but not right now. For right now, that game is an outlier because the damage numbers are so high, and the health values are so high on the enemies. It evens itself out inside the game, but when you're comparing it to the rest of the game, it's very weird, it's very strange. As we see here in Skyward Sword, the Master Sword does 16 damage. That is the equivalent of 4 hearts. Which seems pretty reasonable if we're being totally honest. After all, it is the Blade of Evil's Bane, whereas in Ocarina of Time, it does 2 damage. The Master Sword does the same amount of damage as a Deku Stick. Sorry, what? There's not enough information here. Your levels are too condensed. There's only, 4 real damage sources as far as held things in the game, and when a stick does as much as the Blade of Evil's Bane's legendary blade, you have a problem. And just to prove my point that none of this makes any goddamn sense, the practice sword in Skyward Sword does 1 damage. It takes 2 hits to kill a Keese, a standard fat enemy. 2 hits, and yet this sword can cut through this giant wooden cylinder in 1 slice. I like to repeat that because it sounds vaguely incorrect, doesn't it? 2 hits to kill a Keese, 1 hit to cleave a wooden pillar in half. So let's take a step back and look at a specific Darknut from a game that has more damage values to pull from, and I think maybe we might start to see exactly how powerful they are. And trust me, the results do not disappoint in this case. Because let's be honest, we were never going to figure out the entire series or even find some kind of average across. There's no cohesion here. Not even Nintendo can figure that out. So let's take a look at the Darknut battle in Twilight Princess. Of course, if you actually look into Twilight Princess, there are resistances and damage modifiers all over the place. It's kind of a nightmare, but the Darknut works out really well in that case for one reason. It's not affected by damage modifiers. So a jump attack, at least in my experience, does the same amount to a Darknut once you remove his armor as a roll slice, a jump slice, any kind of slice. It all seems to take the exact same amount of hits, meaning that they seem to be at least immune to modifiers and therefore a great thing to actually figure out their health. So this is a 2-phase battle. If you remember, you actually have to remove that heavy plate armor first, which looks awesome, by the way, beside the point, but it's a 2-phase fight. You have to remove the armor, so we're just going to be calculating the second half of the fight once he's actually vulnerable. So the magic number that we're looking at here is 9 hits with the Master Sword. Now this is important for a handful of reasons, because we'll actually be looking into some information gathered by a Zelda fan that had way too much time on their hands to hit a red bokoblin and actually figure out the damage values of everything with a much larger amount of samples than we can get from the original Zelda or from Ocarina of Time, meaning that a lot of these numbers are going to be a bit more reasonable to our cause. So if we look here, we can actually see that the Ordon sword is twice as strong as the wooden sword, and the Master Sword is 2 times stronger than the Ordon sword. So essentially the Master Sword is 4 times stronger than the weakest sword in the game, which is very reasonable in my opinion. So if we assume that each sword hit is doing 4 damage and 1 point of damage is a quarter of a heart, then of course we can find that the Darknut actually would have about 9 hearts of health, which is pretty impressive if we're being totally honest. But even at that point, usually when you reach this area in the game, you have more than 9 hearts anyway, so it still seems a little short in my mind. But after doing some thinking on it and looking a little bit closer into the graph, I realized something. If we're talking about hearts, the least amount of damage you can actually do is 1/4, which means that 1 damage would essentially be the lowest amount. We've already talked about this, of course, but looking at this graph, we can see this isn't the lowest value amount that we actually have on the graph. That belongs to the slingshot with this half here. If we scale everything so that this half is now a single point of damage instead of a half point of damage, that essentially doubles everything on the graph, meaning that now the Master Sword is actually doing 8 damage or 2 full hearts of damage. Now that gives the Darknut a very impressive 18 hearts. He's a thick boy, and that is much more impressive than 9 or 2. Definitely a lot more impressive than 2. So we've kind of taken a look and noted that his effective health is 18 hearts, but realistically, part of that is probably armor as well. I mean, even when you take off all the all the heavy plate mail, he's got a lot of armor on. So there's probably some damage reduction there, but his effective hearts would be 18, at least to my calculations. So back at it then. Now that we have the 2 extremes in data, we can actually take a look and start to figure out how many hearts we would have in the Zelda universe. A child at about 10 years old seems to have 3 hearts, while a 17-year-old, learning the art of combat has about 6, so double that. Of course, as you grow older, your vitality naturally will increase to a point until it stops doing that. Script. Until it kind of hits a plateau, and then it probably starts going back down, if we're being totally honest. And a battle-hardened warrior can have as much as 18 hearts, a very impressive number. Especially when you take into consideration that the most Link can have is 20. So while it's probably not the most amount of hearts that one entity has in the Zelda universe, of course these seem to be the highest obtainable humanoid sort of benchmarks here. Just simply for the fact that Link is the hero of time, the one hero of time, who may only be rivaled by Ganondorf himself. No idea how many hearts Ganondorf would have, but if you want me to find out, of course I'd be happy to make a video on that as well. So this got complicated really fast, but how many heart containers do you think you have? If I had to name for myself, probably about 5. I mean, I'm reasonably tough. I'm a fairly durable human being, but I'm no, trained soldier or anything like that. So I would say probably 5. If I could go halves, probably 4.5. I mean, I'm definitely, tougher than some 10-year-old. Anyway, let me know if there are any enemies in another game, or this game, of course, that you would like me to take a quick look at and see if we can't deduce what their overall heart container pool might be. Leave them as a comment down below, and of course I will be taking a look at them in the future. Real quick, I just want to say thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It does help me out an awful lot. Real quick, I would love it if you guys would go ahead and check out the Zelda Randomizer series, as we are having a lot of fun on that series at the moment. Taking a bit of a break right now, but we'll be back to it in no time. Or, of course, you can check out my last theory about cursed gold in the land of Hyrule and Termina. in the Zelda universe. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this adventure. I'm Newbornkilik, and I will see you in the next one. I'm out.